Hello. Thank you for being here. It means that you care, and that makes a big difference. Today, I invite you to a deep, honest, and difficult conversation. We will touch on a complex and multifaceted topic, the codependency between parents and children. This invisible bond should unite us, but sometimes it becomes a source of tension and conflict. We will examine why this bond, filled with love, often turns into pain and misunderstanding. It is important to understand that this is not about finding someone to blame. It is an attempt to figure out how to untangle the complex web of control and care, support, and excessive interference. We will try to see the situation from both sides, the parents and the child's, to better understand each other's motives and experiences. During this conversation, you will learn how to distinguish where love ends and control begins, why parental care sometimes becomes a burden, and why a child's desire for freedom is perceived as distancing. We will also look at what mechanisms give rise to these tensions and how to work with them in practice to preserve relationships and help both sides grow. This will be a conversation based on the research of psychologists, philosophers, and life experience, without unnecessary emotion, but with respect for the complexity of human relationships. Let's try together to find a path to mutual understanding and respect that will create a solid foundation for healthy intergenerational relationships. The roots of codependency. Codependency is a pattern of relationships in which a person loses clear boundaries between themselves and another person, leading to excessive responsibility for the feelings and behavior of the other. In psychological literature, codependency is described as a form of interdependence that hinders the development of individual autonomy. Its origins often lie in early childhood. During this period, basic attachment patterns are formed that determine how a child perceives themselves and those around them. If the relationship with the mother or primary caregiver was anxious or inconsistent, this can lead to the formation of an anxious attachment style. Such a child learns to constantly control the behavior of a significant adult in order to maintain the relationship, which transforms into codependency with age. Another important factor is the transmission of parental scenarios from generation to generation. Often, a mother's behavior repeats the patterns of her own mother, which reinforces family patterns of codependency. Often, a mother who herself experiences an internal lack of autonomy unconsciously reinforces her child's dependence. Boundary violations are another key component. Boundaries between individuals form a sense of individuality and autonomy. If there is no respect for personal space in the family, the child becomes accustomed to having their needs and desires subordinated to the mother's needs. This can lead to difficulties in establishing mature relationships later in life. Thus, the roots of codependency lie in a complex intertwining of emotional attachment, parental trauma, and cultural scenarios, which requires awareness and purposeful work to break out of this pattern. Psychological mechanism. Codependent relationships between mother and child are often formed on the basis of unconscious patterns passed down from generation to generation. Such bonds do not always arise from malice or a conscious desire to restrict freedom. Most often, their roots lie in unreflected traumas, deficits, and attitudes acquired in the mother's own childhood. If a person did not receive enough support, acceptance, and security at an early age, they may unconsciously seek it in their interactions with their children. As a result, the parent begins to perceive the child not as an independent personality, but as a source of emotional stability, an extension of themselves, or compensation for past losses. This is the basis of the codependent model. From a psychological point of view, boundaries are violated in such a relationship. The mother may attach excessive importance to the child's behavior, not because she wants to control them, but because she internally associates her well-being with them. The child, in turn, gradually learns that their actions, feelings, and even thoughts must correspond to their mother's reactions. A stable attitude emerges. I have no right to autonomy if it causes discomfort to my mother. This mechanism is especially pronounced in families where the child early on becomes the parent's psychological partner, a comforter, advisor, the only meaning of life. In such cases, there is a phenomenon of role reversal, where the emotional needs of the adult are satisfied at the expense of the child. This can lead to disturbances in the formation of one's own identity, chronic anxiety, low self-esteem, and difficulty in establishing mature partnerships in adult life. Understanding these structures is an important step in working to restore a healthy distance. Creating stable boundaries does not destroy the connection, but makes it mature. Where there is personal autonomy, there is also the opportunity for respectful, equal dialogue. The parent's inner world. Understanding the parent's inner world is key to realizing the reasons for difficulties in relationships with a maturing child. Often, the unwillingness to let go of control is linked to deep psychological factors that are not always obvious on the surface. First, the fear of loneliness plays an important role. The role of a parent often becomes meaningful, and a maturing child becomes the main source of emotional contact and attention. The loss of this role is perceived as a threat to self-identity and causes anxiety, even if the awareness of this anxiety remains implicit. Second, the feeling of loss of meaning and relevance increases internal tension. Many parents invest not only time, but also a significant part of their own energy and life resources in raising their children. When a child becomes more independent, there is a feeling of loss of the meaning invested, which can cause internal conflict and negative emotions. Guilt is another significant factor. It manifests itself in thoughts such as, I gave so much, and now you don't appreciate it. This emotional burden creates tension and reduces the ability to communicate openly. Often, such experiences are associated with unresolved expectations and internal scenarios that support the position of victim in the relationship. From the point of view of psychological models, this dynamic process can be described through Cartman's triangle. The roles of victim, rescuer, and persecutor periodically change, creating cycles of tension. A parent who feels like a victim may become a rescuer by trying to control the child under the guise of care, and then a persecutor when faced with resistance. The child's inner world. Looking at the inner world of an adult child allows us to understand how family relationships shape their psychological state and life strategies. One of the key aspects is anxiety arising from the uncertainty of roles and expectations imposed by the parent. Constant pressure from the family, especially in the form of excessive demands or excessive control, leads to the formation of chronic internal tension in the child. This tension often develops into somatic manifestations, from headaches to stomach problems, which in psychological practice are referred to as psychosomatic. Emotional burnout becomes the result of systematic suppression of one's own desires and needs in favor of fulfilling imposed roles. A sense of duty, which is perceived as an obligation, sometimes turns into emotional bondage, limiting freedom of choice and self-expression. Low self-esteem, often observed in such adult children, is rooted in constant comparison with the ideals that parents impose, or in a feeling of insufficient recognition and support. This complicates decision-making and responsible behavior, as any action is perceived through the prism of fear of error and condemnation. Psychologists such as John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth have pointed to the influence of the quality of early attachments on subsequent personality development. Unfavorable models based on excessive care or criticism create the conditions for psychological instability and problems with autonomy. Understanding these internal processes makes it possible to build new, healthier relationships where the adult child feels heard and free from excessive pressure, which contributes to the development of a mature personality and a stable emotional sphere. Codependency and freedom. Codependency in relationships between parents and adult children often arises from blurred or undefined personal boundaries. In psychological theory, boundaries are not walls, but flexible lines that help each person maintain their individuality while maintaining closeness. The absence or violation of these boundaries leads to a merging of roles and a loss of autonomy. Healthy autonomy assumes that parents and children are able to build relationships based on mutual respect for personal space and independence. It is important to understand that closeness does not equal fusion. Two people can be emotionally close, support each other, but still maintain their independence. And this is what ensures balance in a relationship. The transition from the parent-child model to the person-person model is a key stage in growing up and changing family dynamics. An adult child ceases to be an object of care and becomes an equal partner in dialogue. The mother, in turn, learns to let go of control and accept the child's new status, respecting their right to make their own decisions. This process is not easy and requires awareness. Often, habits formed over many years resist change. But it is precisely this awareness and gradual restructuring of internal scenarios that give us the chance to break codependent patterns and build healthy relationships that offer both freedom and support. In family therapy practice, this transition is accompanied by the establishment of clear boundaries that allow all participants to feel safe and valued. As a result, freedom in relationships becomes the foundation of trust and respect, rather than a cause for rupture or alienation. An image that helps clarify the essence of codependent relationships is the system of roots and trunk in a tree. If we imagine the parent as the root and the child as the growing trunk, we can see an important pattern. The roots, which penetrate deep into the soil, provide nourishment, hold the tree in the soil, and help it survive in inclement weather. But their function is not to control the direction of the tree's growth, but only to support it. If the root system takes up all the space, preventing the trunk from stretching upward, the tree may begin to deform. It grows not because of its natural desire for light, but is forced to bend, adapting to the pressure from below. In botany, this condition leads to limited growth and even disease in the tree. In a psychological context, it leads to the suppression of initiative and independence, and to difficulties in establishing mature boundaries in the child. Codependent relationships are a distortion of a healthy, symbiotic connection. Until a certain age, a child is indeed completely dependent on their mother, physically, emotionally, and psychologically. But as they grow older, a gradual process of differentiation is necessary. As in nature, the higher the trunk rises, the further it is from the roots, but the connection is not lost, it simply takes on a different form. This perspective allows us to see that the essence of a mature relationship is not a complete break, but the preservation of a connection without interference, where the parent remains a stable point of support, but does not determine every turn in the child's life. And it is in this balance of roots and growth that the potential of both sides is revealed. What to do? Practical steps for breaking out of the codependent model. Overcoming codependent relationships between parents and adult children is a process that requires awareness, patience, and a willingness to rethink established roles. Below are structured recommendations that can be useful for both parents and children. 1. Diagnosing the problem. The first and most important step is to recognize the codependency model itself. It is often disguised as normal care, but in essence, it is a violation of personal boundaries. It is recommended to study the topic independently, for example, through the works of Melody Beattie or Virginia Satter, or seek an external expert assessment. 2. Building autonomy. Each side needs to work on restoring their own agency. For parents, this means developing interests outside of controlling their kid. Hobbies, social activities, professional fulfillment. For kids, it means learning decision-making skills and taking responsibility for their own lives. 3. Gradual transformation. Do not expect sudden changes. A new model of communication takes time. It is helpful to discuss the need for change with the child or parent in advance and set realistic expectations. 4. Division of responsibility. Codependent relationships are often accompanied by blurred roles. It is important to clearly understand the boundaries of your responsibility. Parents cannot and should not be responsible for the emotional state of their adult children, and vice versa. 5. Eliminate guilt as a tool of influence. Manipulation through guilt undermines trust and leads to the accumulation of internal resistance. It is more effective to use the language of needs and intentions. It is important for me to be in touch with you, instead of you never call. 6. Developing dialogue skills. This is not about agreement, but about the ability to hear and understand the other person's position. Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication approaches can form the basis for constructive interaction. 7. Seeking support. Individual or family therapy is an effective tool for working with persistent patterns. Psychotherapy helps to form new relationship scenarios based on a mature personal position rather than habitual emotional reflexes. Building a mature relationship between a parent and an adult child requires going beyond the usual role scenarios. Where it used to be natural to instruct, guide, and protect, there comes a time when dialogue, respect for boundaries, and recognition of the other's autonomy are more appropriate. The psychological maturity of a parent is expressed not in control, but in the ability to maintain contact without pressure, to give space without distancing oneself. This does not mean a rejection of love or significance. On the contrary, relationships built on respect for other people's decisions are more stable and deeper. Philosopher Eric Fromm wrote in his book, The Art of Loving, "Mature love is a union while maintaining integrity. It is a union in which each person remains themselves. Such a union is possible between parents and children if communication is based on understanding rather than dependence. Separating living spaces and refusing emotional fusion does not destroy the connection, but rather leads to a more functional and healthy form of intimacy. Here, constant presence or intervention is no longer necessary. It is enough to be ready to be there when it is really needed. This path requires inner work, reflection, and the ability to listen to oneself and others. But it is precisely this path that makes relationships stable over time. There is no need to fight for attention because everyone develops respect for each other's freedom, and this becomes the basis of trust. If a parent and child can consciously move to a new level of interaction, the bond between them will not weaken, but on the contrary, will become more mature, calmer, and stronger. How do you perceive this topic from the perspective of a parent or an adult child? Which points seem particularly significant to you, and where do you have internal objections? Intergenerational relationships are a complex and multifaceted area. It is important not only to analyze, but also to be aware of your own participation in the process, your reactions, expectations, and boundaries. If you're willing to share your perspective, please do so in the comments. This broadens the discussion and helps to consider the topic from different points of view. Reflecting on such questions is not always comfortable, but it is a necessary step toward improving personal and family relationships. We are not looking for absolute answers, but we are trying to see the problem more deeply. Thank you for your attention, and see you in the next video.